I'd like to tell you a little bit, first of all, about my own story with death before I start talking about death itself, and tell you about the origins of my interest in it. I have lifelong interest in death and dying. When I was a child, I lived on the edge of Salford in Greater Manchester. The road where I grew up had 50 or 60 houses on it. It was a new estate then, and the houses were mainly bought by young married couples with or without children. There were maybe 40 children at primary school age on that road during my early years, and there's one black and white photograph, which I've not seen for a while, which shows loads of us, all at primary school age, sitting on the rag and bone man's horse-drawn cart. And this was part of the weekly round of events. Whenever he appeared, children would race up the street, climb on the cart, and stay on the cart until the end of the road, and then get off, presumably to make space for the next swarm of children. I remember him as being a very patient man. Of those children in that photograph, round about a quarter died young. Statistically speaking, this is exceptional in England, but it gave all of us growing up there an early exposure to how close death could be, even to children. My grandparents had all died before I reached my early teens. I can remember being taken to see both of my granddads laid out on their beds in their bedrooms with their arms neatly folded. I must have been judged too young to see my grandmas, or perhaps I just don't remember. At 18, in my first year at university, a younger, close family member died. Within weeks, I'd approached a priest to ask about ordination. The world lost a lawyer and gained a priest, which is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your point of view. And as a priest, wherever I've served, I found myself making a priority of care of the dying, of the bereaved, and getting funerals as right as I could. Finding myself as a hospice chaplain for the last 10 years and starting some research into dying has, in retrospect, a sort of inevitability to it. At the heart of it, I'm still asking the same basic question that I have all of my life. Where do the dead go? I've been a hospice chaplain long enough also to know that talking and thinking about death and dying can sometimes summon emotions that you didn't realize were there, and call up memories that you thought you'd let go of. So whenever people who work in hospices talk to groups, we generally offer a health warning. If you find yourself distressed by anything I touch on in this next time together, please seek me out afterwards, or I'm sure any member of the conference committee, or just someone you like, and make some time to talk it through. Don't wander off just carrying that. Does it matter how we die? The conference question, I loved the conference question, does it matter how we die, contains at least two questions. Firstly, there is the subjective experience of dying. Does it matter how I die? Does it matter how someone close to me dies? And the answer, of course, is yes, very much. At the most basic level of ethics, our common human experience tells us that it feels better for good things to happen than for bad things to happen. So with death, it is better for the experience to be as good as possible. Our unique decision-making processes, with a little professional help, are the best guide to getting an experience to feel good to us. So in this area of the question, maximizing our individual choices about the manner of our dying is the main goal. Our self-determination, our autonomy is all. It is our death. But the conference question, does it matter how we die, has a second part too. And that is, does our dying take place in some greater context? Does that greater context make demands on the manner of our death and dying? In other words, are our choices, our self-determination, our autonomy, all that counts? Or are there proper limits, necessary limits, to what has become seen as a right to choose to die in the way that seems best to the individual? And I hope to say something about both of those questions. Firstly, I want to talk about, does it matter how I die, or how someone close to me dies? And specifically about what the hospice movement has learned about making a death as good as it can be. The hospice movement emerged from a period of enormous excitement in medicine. A huge number of things in a relatively short space of human history became possible. We could fix stuff in human beings that was only dreamed about for previous generations. And I'm generalizing here. But along with that massive growth in human ability to fix stuff in people came a sense that death was a sort of medical failure. And it became an awkward thing to engage with. If it couldn't be fixed, do we need to do anything? And a number of people felt that we could actually do death and dying much better. A lot of medics, after the Second War, and that whole period, starting to feel that there are ways of doing death and dying better than we are. We need to anticipate a step change in the way that we engage with the care. Certainly we need to engage with it and not ignore it. And there are many distinguished figures in that whole switch in the way that death and dying was viewed. One who has a fair claim to have her name over the door is Dame Cicely Saunders. It's also a rule to mention her in any presentation given by a hospice chaplain. Cicely Saunders, though, represented a groundswell of feeling, but she captured that mood. And she had, and others, a couple of quite brilliant insights, amongst others, but these two I want to talk about concerned pain. First of all, she thought, wouldn't it be marvellous to anticipate pain rather than respond to it? It sounds straightforward now, but there is a huge ethical implication. Pain-controlled drugs can marginally shorten life expectancy, and there is the danger of addiction. And doctors are sworn to do no harm. And so this was a huge ethical obstacle to be overcome. But it was overcome, and it is the insight, if you like, of the hospice movement that came out of those pioneers, that pain should be anticipated rather than just responded to. The difference being the experience of pain for the individual. The second insight about pain was that pain wasn't just a matter of controlling what was happening in terms of physical sensations of pain in the body. If somebody was lying in the bed worrying about how their children were going to manage after their death, you could administer as many pain-controlling drugs as you like, but that person still won't settle. If there is someone with a fractured relationship or an ancient worry on their conscience, again, you can administer as many drugs as you like, but that person will not settle. There seems to be a unique knotting of pain. And it was given 4 headings, pain, within the hospice schema, which has now been adopted by the World Health Organization, because we're the world leaders, the British, in hospice and palliative care. So our definitions have great currency. And the 4 areas of pain are physical pain, social pain, psychological or emotional pain, and spiritual pain. And all of those areas of pain have to be attended to. And so the idea of the hospice movement is that we call into the room, so to speak, with the patient, people who can lead in awareness on all of those areas of pain. And the patient can then choose who they need from that team at any one time. And essentially, that's what we still do. A huge number of people gathered in the room, allowing the patient to choose who they need at any one time to unlock their particular bundle of pain. Physical pain control drugs have moved on enormously. They're incredibly sophisticated now. When I sit in the multidisciplinary team meeting and hear the doctors talking about their pain interventions, the nuancing pain intervention is now so sophisticated. There are loads of different drugs. They can be administered in different ways. They can target different parts of the body at different times of day. They can deal with different symptoms. All sorts of possibilities are there. And this is all discussed and agreed with the one who is dying and their families or other carers. And this chemical therapy is supplemented by a wide range of complementary therapies, as well as talking therapies, which I suppose is the sort of area I'm in, chaplaincy, as well as counselling. Our experience is then that in addition to the good management of the physical side of dying, there are other areas that need to be taken into account. And I want to address those other areas using different words now from the ones I've already used. The three other things that on the whole matter very much to people. And these three things are hope, companionship, and peace. Lists are much beloved in healthcare teaching. It's become second nature to me to give you lists. On the whole, if you attend to this list, you will promote a sense of hope in someone. If you attend to this list, you will wreck it. I'd like to show you the next slide, a name of someone who I know doesn't need to be introduced to this conference. And it connects with hope. It's the one I want to pick up from that particular list. Peter Fenwick, I know, has addressed this conference on a number of occasions. And this wonderful little booklet by Sue Brain and Peter Fenwick, it's only about 30, 40 pages long. When I arrive in a new hospice, fairly early on, I print it off and give it to all the nurses. It's a wonderfully accessible book. And the one thing about this book that I want to pick out, because there's lots of stuff packed into that small space, and the one area about hope that I want to just focus on briefly is something he refers to that nurses used to call when Granny comes to visit. And there's a limit to how much I can say when it's being recorded in a public hall when I'm speaking on behalf of a hospice. There are certain things that if the press got hold of, they would absolutely love. And so hospices have to be cautious about what's said in public. But I can tell you that when Granny comes to visit is part of the normal routine of hospice care. It's a regular and known experience. A nurse, a new hospice I'm in, 3 weeks. I know all about it now. One of the nurses was speaking to me on Monday, talking about a patient whose mum kept coming to visit. And she was coming to visit so often, this lady was telling the nurse that she just wished she'd leave her alone. But many of us, if we've been working in hospices or working with the dying, may have had that experience where we say hello to someone, hello, it's David, and they don't really look at us, they're looking into a middle distance past us. And I've had this experience more than once, somebody smiling in that middle distance. And you know from other members of the team that they've been seeing someone who's been close to them, who has died, and who they believe is there to welcome them home. Peter Fenwick makes a very good observation in this booklet, because you could say, yeah, drug-induced hallucinations, part of the pain control, but that's not how drug-induced hallucination feels. That feels much scratchier, maybe a bit scary, maybe it's spiders on the wall or weird stuff happening that disconcerts. These experiences are quite different in their nature and their sensation. There's an enormous amount of peace brought by it, a great deal of hope, and not infrequently a smile. Companionship is the next element of care that is very important to people in their dying. And it's the second greatest fear after the fear of pain. We find that if you can reassure people that there is a lot we can do with pain, and that you will not be alone unless you want to be, by and large the request for the address in Switzerland recedes. This is a great fear and needs to be addressed. Just to tell you one story about this, it's told by a friend of mine, former colleague. He's retired last year, Tom Gordon, who was chaplain at Marie Curie Hospice in Edinburgh, and a Scot and a great storyteller. He's written a cracking book called New Journeys Now Begin, full of stories. Tom tells this story. He was going on to the ward. They had Nightingale wards there at the time. And sister on duty said, "Oh, Tom, you might not want to visit the new guy. I don't think he likes vicars much." And so Tom did what we are trained to do, which was to smile encouragingly at an enabling distance and move on to the next bed. The chap who just arrived was a Scot, like Tom. He'd been a lifelong miner, which rather dates the story, really, and shop steward with the Scottish National Union of Mine Workers. He's also a lifelong Marxist and, accordingly, a lifelong atheist. After a couple of days, he asked to see Tom, whose heart sank, expecting to be harangued about opiates and of the people. But that wasn't what the chap wanted at all. He'd seen Tom walking about, decided he was a nice guy, decent listener. He wanted to tell him his life story. And for 15 minutes here, half an hour there, whenever Tom had time, he'd go back and he'd get another chapter from this guy. And at the end of a couple of weeks, the man said to Tom, "Will that do?" And it had been a good life. He'd been straight, he'd worked hard, he'd raised his family as well as he could, he'd got grandchildren, he'd been honourable. And Tom said, "Absolutely, that will do." And he died a couple of days later. Nobody's lifelong beliefs had to be challenged, but something in that companionship was the most profound kind of care. Something in that companionship helped him enormously in his journey towards his dying. And I was struck by the conversation yesterday evening about how we relate to each other with our different worldviews. We have so much in common in sharing our stories, honouring each other's stories. One of the most profound things we can do with each other. And sadly, that's not what we tend to do first. We tend to just look at the differences. So that's companionship and its value. Peace. I have a couple of things to say here, I think. First of all, this last one, facilitate reconciliation where possible. Whenever I put that slide up there in a presentation, I'm reminded of one particular man. And I'm anonymizing wildly here, obviously, so I'm not betraying any confidences. But he had lost touch with his son some years earlier. They were both proud, independent men, and they'd quarrelled about something stupid that neither of them probably could remember. And they'd just stopped seeing each other, and as the years had gone by, it had become harder and harder and harder to speak. And this chap was now in bed. It was his final admission to the hospice. And as far as we knew, he had days, maybe a couple of weeks. And the one thing he really, really wanted to help himself feel at peace with what was happening was to speak to his son. So the medical director and I sort of increasingly frenetic attempts to persuade the son to come and see his dad, but he wouldn't. And in the end, we agreed with the chap that he'd done his best and the rest he could just hand over to God and ask God to look after his son. Now, the chap was really worried about his son because he and his dad had done exactly the same thing. And he knew what his son was going to have to live with. We facilitate reconciliation where possible, but in real life it isn't always. But there are always ways of talking about peace, to hand things over to God in the end, knowing that you've tried your best. The other story about peace I'd like to tell you is from, now this I don't need to anonymise, the family gave permission for me to tell this. It's from the Marie Curie Hospice in Solihull, where I was a chaplain for a little while, before St Richard's, bless them, offered me a full-time job. This was a guy a little younger than me at the time, in his early 40s. He'd done what sometimes happens, he'd got too fond of drink. And his drinking got out of control, and he lost everything. His behaviour became such that he lost his job, worked at Land Rover in Solihull. He lost touch with his birth family, they disowned him. And his own family, in the end, his wife kicked him out and he was kept away from the children. And at one point he was on the streets. He got about as low as you could get. And then he did that thing that human beings can do, which I'm just bowled over by every time I hear it. He decided to stop drinking. And if you've ever been addicted to something, you know what sort of grit it takes to address that. And he picked himself up, he went dry, and he just started to rebuild his life little bit by little bit. He met a new lady who helped him enormously. He got another job at Land Rover, and things weren't great with his ex-wife, but they were talking, and he was seeing his children again, and his birth family had owned him again, and he was going around the clubs in the area with his twin brother playing music. He was a guitarist. He loved it. And all that courage and effort. And then out of the blue, he was given a diagnosis that gave him months to live. So unfair. And he was so angry. The rage was palpable. And he couldn't shake it. He was gripped by it. He came into the hospice and he was unbearable. He was so rude. He was aggressive. Because he was on the ceiling, his family were on the ceiling too. And it was a Nightingale ward, and it threw the whole atmosphere of the ward. Other families were tiptoeing around them, and the staff were tiptoeing. He was discharged, we breathed out. Readmitted, just as bad, just as angry, just as rude. Do you want a cup of coffee? Very long list of expletives about coffee. Discharged, we breathed out. Third admission, he was a different man. We talked about it afterwards. How had we done anything here? And we decided in the end there was no one thing. It was just lots of little acts of kindness. And one of the doctors who had teenage children at the time, she said this from the heart. She said, in the end, that's how we turn teenagers into adults. We love them more than they deserve. And maybe that was the magic bullet, 1,000 little acts of kindness. But whatever it was, he wanted to be christened. I don't tell this as a conversion story. This is about him completing stories in his life. Marie Curie doesn't run to fonts, so in the end I commandeered a fruit bowl, which is still the hospice font, I believe. And we christened him, and he watched some films he wanted to. He spent time with people he wanted to, played music with his brother. And he died quite peacefully. No great rocket science here. Just love, I think. So far I've talked about the very subjective answer to the question, does it matter how I die, or how people close to me die? And the experience of the hospice movement is emphatically yes, it does matter. And we have developed considerable expertise in assisting people in experiencing the dying and death they choose. However, so far, individual choice, self-determination and autonomy has been my only consideration. I want to ask now whether there should be any limits to that individual choice, that autonomy. And I want to do this by asking two questions. Firstly, can we really ask, does it matter how we die, without asking, does it matter how we live? And secondly, I want to ask whether one contemporary hot topic, assisted dying, is a safe individual choice or not. First then, can we talk about the manner of our dying without talking about the manner of our living? There are many, many reasons why death and dying in our society finds itself safely separated out from the business of living. On the whole, we don't die at home. It's the health professionals, not our families and friends, who are most importantly in attendance. A small boy now would no longer see his grandparents laid out in their bedrooms. It is the funeral director who takes the body away and makes it ready for visiting. And with the honourable exception of churchyards, our burial places are on the discreet edges of our communities. I mean, this is a whole other presentation about why that may be so, but simply put, it is the case that it was not always like this, and that death in an earlier age was, as is the case elsewhere in the world still, much more in the centre of life and community. We have lost from our culture this way of thinking, this dance of death, the living dancing with their death throughout their lives, being aware of it. This one's from Lubeck. It's a copy. I'm afraid the RAF bombed the original, but that wasn't the original. In fact, the original, I think, which was 15th century, had gone by the end of the 16th. So it's a second version, but it's close to the original. One consequence of this marginalisation of death and dying is that it is viewed as somehow separate from life. Obviously it isn't. It is part of life. It's a defining part of the experience of being human. And we would be much richer spiritually if the fact of our eventual death was a regular part of our living awareness. And I want to try to explain that by reference to a striking list called the 5 Regrets of the Dying. This was put together by an Australian palliative care nurse, Ronnie Ware, and the list is a distillation of conversations with many dying people, and it is instantly recognisable as authentic by anyone who works with the dying. Here are the top 5 regrets of the dying. First regret. This is the most common regret of all, writes Ronnie Ware in her book. When people realise that their life is almost over and look back clearly on it, it is easy to see how many dreams have gone unfulfilled. Most people had not honoured even a half of their dreams, and had to die knowing that it was due to the choices they'd made or not made. Health brings a freedom very few realise until they no longer have it. I'd like to add to Ronnie Ware's words there, I think the key thing is to attempt dreams, to strive for them, not necessarily to achieve them. I've heard so many people talk about their sadness at not taking more risks and pursuing dreams. Second regret, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Ronnie Ware writes this, and I recognise every word. This came from every male patient that I nursed. They missed their children's youth, their partner's companionship. Women also spoke of this regret, but as most were from an older generation, many of the female patients had not been breadwinners. All of the men I nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives on the treadmill of a work existence. Third regret. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. Is this an English disease in particular? Many people suppress their feelings in order to keep peace with others. As a result, they settled for a mediocre existence, this is Ronnie Ware's words again, and never became who they were truly capable of becoming. Many developed illnesses relating to the bitterness and resentment that they carried as a result. Some people at the end won't communicate with anyone, literally turn their faces to the wall. My experience from sparse words exchanged here and there is that there is often a profound gloom that accompanies the end of a life spent bottling up feelings, suppressing your own opinions. Regret number 4. I wish I'd stayed in touch with friends. Ronnie Ware. Often they would not truly realise the full benefits of old friends until their dying weeks, and it was not always possible to track them down. Many had become so caught up in their own lives that they had let golden friendships slip by over the years. There were many deep regrets about not giving friendships the time and effort that they deserved. Everyone misses their friends when they are dying. A shocking number of men who have been in my care had not had a single close friend. The 5th regret. I wish that I'd let myself be happier. This is a surprisingly common one. Ronnie Ware writes, many did not realize until the end that happiness is a choice. Many stayed stuck in old patterns and habits. The so-called comfort of familiarity overflowed into their emotions as well as their physical lives. Fear of change had them pretending to others and to themselves that they were content, when deep within they longed to laugh properly and have silliness in their life again. If it matters to us how we die, it is of vital importance that we attend to how we live. Attending to our mortality in our prayer life, in our thinking about life, has the power to save us from trivial worries and inauthentic living. We cannot separate off the experience of dying from the experience of living. We all die in character, for good or ill, and that character is formed by choices made or avoided on the journey. That then is the first limit on our freedom of choice about how it will feel to die, and it is self-inflicted. We are limited, notwithstanding deathbed repentance and the like, we are limited in our dying by how we have lived. If it matters to you how you die, if it matters to me how I die, and all the evidence suggests that it will, it must matter to us how we live. My second question about whether there are or should be any limits on choices about how we die is a hot topic: assisted dying. Is this purely an individual choice, or is there a proper limit here? And if so, why is this the boundary of our freedom to choose? Assisted dying is also referred to as assisted suicide. It's an alternative form of a word that's very familiar to us, euthanasia, which means good death from the Greek. And this is maybe the hot topic in my area of work. And statistically, it is highly likely that there will be widely varying views in this room. What is assisted dying? Well, I've included the House of Lords Select Committee on Medical Ethics definition just here. It is a deliberate intervention undertaken with the express intention of ending a life to relieve intractable suffering. Underlying that definition, there are some expectations, and these include that the person who is asking to die is making an informed choice, that the intention of the one who provides the means of dying is compassion, that the method used is as swift and pain-free as possible, and that the person truly benefits from dying. The Judeo-Christian tradition, we know, has always been opposed to assisted dying. There is a minority report, of course, but the weight of the tradition is against it. And the most significant principle, as far as I can see, involved in challenging assisted dying is that a person is not the sole owner of their life. They co-own it with God, who has traditionally withheld consent. In surveys, British doctors remain opposed to changes in the current cautious legislation, although the majority has reduced in recent years, and a clear majority of hospice doctors are opposed to changes in the current legislation. It's in the area of assisted dying where the questions, whose death is it anyway, and does it matter how we die, are most keenly debated. It's a clash of worldviews at its heart, and I feel we all have to consider where we stand. This is where I stand. Death for me is a liminal place. It's the door through which we all must pass. It's an ending of something, and it's a beginning of something. I'm privileged to work in one of those places on the planet where the veil is thin. It is a gestation into new life, and birth cannot safely be forced. All of the great faith traditions, some minority reports aside, all of those traditions, those based in the Abrahamic tradition of one life, one judgment, one future state, and those based on reincarnation, are both nervous around assisted dying, and the weight of their teaching is against it. My own position, I'd just like to tell a story, really, to illustrate it. Gardeners can be entirely ruthless with weeds, but elsewhere in the garden they can be the gentlest of people. One gardener, having just worked out all of his aggression on some ground elder, came across a butterfly struggling to emerge from a cocoon. Sitting quietly by it with his flask of tea beside him, he watched the frantic wriggling for quite some time before deciding to lend a hand. Very gently, with his pruning knife, he eased things along to make it easier for the butterfly to free itself. The emergent creature lay there, strangely shriveled and clearly unready for flight. Even a small drop of sweet tea, the Englishman's cure-all, didn't help. Gradually, and with a growing sense of sadness, it occurred to him that perhaps the struggle had been a necessary part of the process. Perhaps it was in the action of having to squeeze hard in order to get out of the cocoon that the hydraulic invigoration of the wings became possible. Perhaps it was in the struggle that the ability to fly was earned. Of course, he wouldn't have intervened to shorten the process if he'd known the consequences of his kindness. Does it matter how we die? Yes, absolutely, and much more than we sometimes realize. Whose death is it anyway? Ours, but not exclusively, and there are limits beyond which our choosing becomes dangerous.